I'm Stuart McIntosh with the BBC News. Hello. A senior US prosecutor says two men convicted of the murder in 1965 of the American civil rights leader Malcolm X are to have their convictions quashed. The Manhattan District Attorney said Muhammad Aziz and Khalil Islam, who were both in jail for 2 decades, didn't get the justice they deserved. Malcolm X, one of the most charismatic leaders of the civil rights movement in the United States, was shot multiple times as he was about to deliver a speech. Barbara Plett-Usher explains why the attorney said the two men would, in all likelihood, have been acquitted at trial.
They found evidence that the FBI, the police, and prosecutors had withheld key evidence that, if it had been allowed at the trial, would have connected the dots to a different suspect. They also interviewed a witness who had, at that time, called one of the two men at his home on the night of the killing, so confirmed his alibi. And then just really emphasizing something that was very significant, which is that the third man who was convicted and who actually confessed to the crime had said on the stand at the time that these two men were not his accomplices.
US official figures say more than 100,000 Americans have died of drug overdoses during a year-long period during the COVID-19 pandemic. It's the highest yearly death toll from drugs overdoses ever recorded in the United States. Data from the Centers for Disease Control and Prevention showed overdose deaths rose nearly 30% in the 12 months ending in April this year. A court in the US has sentenced a man known as the QAnon shaman to 41 months in prison for his role in the deadly assault at the Congress building in January by followers of Donald Trump. Prosecutors described Jacob Chansley as the flag-bearer of the Capitol riot events after he was pictured in the Congress building wearing a horned headdress. 5 people died when thousands of people stormed the Capitol in an attempt to stop the certification of President Joe Biden's election victory. Doctors in Sudan say 14 people have been shot dead by security forces as thousands took to the streets of Khartoum to protest against the recent military takeover. They say tear gas has been fired inside hospital buildings and soldiers have prevented some of the wounded from getting treatment. Sally Nabil has more details on the current unrest.
Power should have been handed over to the civilian government, and Sudan should have been transformed into a full civilian democracy. But this step now seems further than ever after the army took power last month. And the big question is how the military rulers are going to run this country with all these protests taking place and with political parties totally unhappy and voicing their total rejection of the coup.
That was Sally Nabil reporting. I'm Stuart McIntosh here in London, bringing you the latest world news from the BBC. The Pakistani government has passed controversial amendments to the country's Election Act during a hostile joint session of Parliament. One change authorises the use of electronic voting machines. The other gives some 9 million Pakistanis overseas the right to vote in general elections online. The move sparked furious protests from the opposition, who say the government's trying to rig the next election. Poland's border force says about 1,000 migrants remain in the frontier with Belarus as the EU stepped up its efforts to resolve the crisis. The head of the European Commission, Ursula von der Leyen, said the EU would send $800,000 worth of food, blankets and other aid to migrants at the border. Police in Israel say they've shot dead a 16-year-old youth in Jerusalem's Old City after he stabbed 2 officers near a Jewish religious school there. The officers were treated in hospital. The youth was a local resident. A dissident Cuban actor and playwright, Junior Garcia, has arrived in Spain after attempting to organise an anti-government protest in Havana on Monday. Cuba's communist government, said Mr Garcia, left the country of his own will and denied reaching an agreement with the Spanish authorities. Leonardo Rocha reports.
Junior Garcia, who's in his late 30s, wrote on social media that he and his wife were alive, healthy and with their ideas intact. He hasn't disclosed whether he'd requested political asylum, but promised to clarify his situation in the next few days. On the day of the pro-democracy march, Cuban security agencies prevented Mr. Garcia and other organizers from leaving their homes. Many dissidents were detained, extra police were deployed on the streets of Havana, and the protests didn't go ahead as planned. President Miguel Díaz-Canel accused the United States of orchestrating the protests to create unrest.
BBC News.